right. Well, this is a little bit of an unusual episode. We are doing a 2024 recap, and this will be our last episode of the year. And we have Mofi on the show. Hi, Mofi.
Hey, everyone. I don't know if it's back, but I'm here.
Welcome back, Mofi. We're glad to have you on for this, our first year-end recap episode. We haven't done this before, so we hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, we just figured let's just jump on a call, the three of us, and then talk a little bit how 2024 has been, not only for the podcast, but I think for everything, Kubernetes, Cloud Native, KubeCons, life.
The universe and everything.
The universe and everything. The universe and beyond, I guess.
Sure.
So, I don't know, how do you want to get started, Kaslin? Should we go through how the year have been for you? You know?
Yeah, we could start with general overviews, or we could start from the beginning.
Beginning of times? Epoch 1990, right?
Beginning.
That's such a nerdy thing to say.
Well played.
We can start with some stats if you want.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, we typically publish a report. We did that last year, and we're planning to do one this year. And usually we kind of like share a little bit of, you know, how much followers and how much kind of listeners we had through the year. And I have some stats in front of me. Maybe we can start there. What do you think?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So starting with 2024, we are, as of now, at around 300K total downloads, right? For the entire year. Bear in mind, we're recording this kind of end of November, so we still have almost a month ago. I think that the first thing to bring up is we have been much more consistent this year compared to last year.
So much more consistent.
Yeah, we published every 2 weeks, except the month of June when we had 4 special episodes for the 10 years anniversary of Kubernetes. And so based on the stats, it actually shows we don't really have that much spikes in downloads. It's kind of more consistent.
Yeah, I'm excited to publish a report like we did last time. Last time we had like a graphic that we put together of how the podcast was doing, and we posted that on all of our social media. So look out for that soon. I'm very interested in how much more consistent the graph is this time.
I mean, I'm looking at it. It is very consistent. We had a little bit of a dip in listening in July, but that's because we suddenly went from 4 episodes in June to like 2 episodes in July. So that's to be expected, I guess.
Yeah. It was an interesting time this summer with the 10-year anniversary of Kubernetes.
Yeah, that was a lot of work. We should have probably brought Mofi to help us a bit.
Yeah.
So I think we should just start off by talking about the 10 year of Kubernetes. Kubernetes is 10 years old.
Sure.
1 decade old. So what has been your experience in talking to the community? I have been talking to a lot of people about like how they feel about Kubernetes in its second decade. And I have had a chance to chat with some of the original maintainers, as well as some of the newer maintainers, as well as end users. So what has that been like for you all?
It has been certainly an adventure. The interesting thing about it for me is that it's gone the entire year, really. From the very beginning of the year, there was planning for KubeCon EU in Paris. And so the community was all excited. It's the first KubeCon within the year of the 10-year anniversary. So, of course, they're going to do a whole bunch of 10-year anniversary stuff to some extent, except also the time between KubeCon North America and KubeCon EU was particularly short last year. And so there wasn't a whole lot of time to plan stuff for KubeCon EU, so people were kind of scrambling to get things together. But we did get some really nice stuff done. I worked with Tim Hawken and Josh Burkus to design a T-shirt for contributors for the Contributor Summit. I also designed a new Kubernetes contributor pin. If you are a regular contributor to Kubernetes and you attend one of the contributor summits or now maintainer summits, you used to get a patch to say you're a Kubernetes contributor, but we switched it recently to pins that say that you're a Kubernetes contributor. So, fun fact, and another reason to contribute. And then in July or June, of course, there was the 10-year anniversary event, which planning that was a whole big thing. I got to be in a documentary about the 10-year anniversary of Kubernetes, which was super cool. Got to go to the event where they premiered part of it, and they had all of those wonderful talks from folks who were involved in the early days. That was a really fun event just to talk with people. and then KubeCon North America. So the 10-year anniversary spanned the entirety of 2024, let's say.
Yeah, I think for me it was certainly interesting. So the first thing I'm going to say off the top of my head, I can finally say I am a Kubernetes SME because I have 7 years experience on Kubernetes, right? I can put that on my resume, subject matter experts. All this from time to time, like a job posted on LinkedIn, ask for people to have 15 years experience on Kubernetes. Sure.
Yeah.
Obviously.
I think like only person in the world that would probably have like 10 plus years are the people originally at Google that was started working on 7. That's kind of like the history for, right? 7 of Borg.
Yes.
So they're just over 10 years
7
of experience. 7 of 9. Yeah. Right.
Of the Borg.
Oh boy, that's history. We can talk about it all day, but
that's pop culture.
Pop culture references. But like, yeah, that listing that we saw for like, requiring 10 years of experience, like about 2 years ago, there was a job listing that actually came out.
Longer than that. I feel like from just a couple of years into Kubernetes, those started popping up.
Yeah.
I've seen 15, so.
Oof, yeah.
Nice.
I think 10 is like such a solid number, right? 10 feels like it just established to a certain degree. So I think that's what the recruiters were coming from. Like if you have 10 years of experience on something, you probably know what you're talking about for the most part.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, so for the 10 years anniversary, for me, it was 2 meetups. So I'm going to say the names here, but they're like 2 small cities in the Nordics. One in a city called Aarhus, 3 hours away from Copenhagen, and another one in a city called Bergen, 6 hours away from Oslo. The funny part was that there was actually a 10 years anniversary party in my city in Stockholm, but I couldn't make that one. So, but as Kaslin said, the year felt short. There was a lot of things going on following each other. And here we are at the end of the year.
I'm not sure if it felt short or long or both, but one other thing I want to call out is, Mofi, you mentioned that if you have 10 years of experience now, which a number of people do, you're probably working on Borg, but also folks who are at Red Hat and working on the very early bits of Kubernetes like Clayton Coleman.
Yep, definitely.
It was really nice to get to interview Clayton and Don and Kelsey Hightower and Tim Hawken. Such a variety of folks who were involved with the early days. And then some of the newer leaders in the community like Nabarun and Nikita. So it's amazing how the community has grown. And one thing that I really loved that I learned from Dawn was about the origins of Borg. I've read the Borg papers before, but hearing her talk about like the original ideas behind Borg and how that inspired Kubernetes. And to me, the most interesting, very interesting thing at least, was that Borg was really originally designed for AI-style workloads, and then that kind of got left behind when it moved to an open source project because that wasn't so much needed at the time. But now that it is, it's like going back to those roots. I find that fascinating, and I keep thinking about that whenever I see stuff about AI on Kubernetes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's kind of interesting how we're coming like full circle. How it was designed and then how it was used, and now we're back to almost like square one, right?
Except with a lot more technical debt.
Oh, yes, of course. Mofi, what's about you? How was the 10 years anniversary for you?
I did not get to do as much stuff, but there were a few events that I got to go to. There was a meetup in New York that I was participating in. I think for me, it was mostly about talking to people and how they're feeling about. One fun conversation I have had where someone was like, oh yeah, Kubernetes is now legacy. We need to start a new thing because it's too old. So,
of course.
Which is kind of like the cycle of tech, right? Like you do something for some time and then the initial ideas probably gets overloaded with newer ideas. And at some point you feel like, okay, this thing is too complex. We got to start over. Hopefully that doesn't happen with Kubernetes, but it is the cycle of tech. It will happen eventually where newer and newer people are going to come, and a lot of the original ideas that initially started Kubernetes are going to get layered under a bunch of newer ideas. So it's going to be kind of complex and convoluted to understand exactly what the purpose of this whole thing is. And people are going to look for something simpler. We already see this with like tools running on top of Kubernetes for application delivery or like CI/CD that writes their own DSL instead of directly targeting Kubernetes YAML, which again, even in like 2015, Kelsey Hightower was talking about how Kubernetes is not the end goal. It's the platform to build a platform on top of. So ideally, in this world where I have spent so much effort and time learning about the system, we build on top and not just build anew. But we will see where the next decade takes us. I think this is partly our responsibility to make sure the new people that are coming into the system have enough of a resource for them to feel like they belong, both basically technically and as a community, as well as they have rooms to grow and flourish and learn and build new things.
I think those are the most important things for the community going forward. I am amused at how we kind of all framed the 10-year anniversary in terms of events, because it's really a community moment. The technology will keep developing. There's no, we had 3 releases this year, which were awesome, and there was a lot of really good stuff in them. But there's nothing that's like, this is the 10-year anniversary, and so technically the project has changed dramatically. It's a moment for the community to celebrate how far it's come and to think very seriously about how we're going to continue to maintain it and improve it going forward.
And speaking of those releases, right? So those releases are kind of time locked, where we actually decide when the releases are going to happen even before the year starts. So it's more about features making into the release rather than features making a release happen.
That is a good point.
Yes.
Right? It's not like some new code got written, so we need to make a new release. Is that the release is going to happen in August. Whether or not your code makes it is up to you, right? For each project maintainer. So for that reason, each individual release is, I guess, less, I'm not going to say less important, but I'm going to say it's less dependent on the code that gets written for it, because release just gets time locked 3 times a year. This time release is going to happen. They fluctuate by about a 1 week time at max, but usually it just happens on the day it was said and scheduled for months at this point. So whether or not a lot of new cool code comes out or not, release just keeps happening. And Kubernetes, I don't think will ever get to 2.0 because it just it comes with breaking changes, which is, I don't think at this point feasible for the amount of things that are running on top of Kubernetes. So we're going to just keep having really newer stuff in the same brand, same 1.0 Kubernetes.
Unless there is a major change in the architecture, which I don't see it happening myself, but unless there is some major changes.
Yeah, I hope that does not happen. We don't want another Python 2.3 shenanigan in the
Kubernetes. I agree.
That took, 2022 is when finally they deprecated Python 2, right? That took 14 years. So no, thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
I don't want it.
It's definitely an interesting observation what you're talking about. It's each release is about whichever feature makes it to that specific date. And if you don't make it, you don't make it, and you have to wait. But I'm willing to bet that there is probably people that are not willing to wait and they just build their own release because it's open source, right? Nothing can prevent you from just pulling some code and running it yourself, right?
Kubernetes is such a big project though, and it's used in such important production environments. I'm sure the majority of folks just let the community do the release and probably don't try to mess with it. It's such a large code base. I would be nervous trying to build it myself with code that is not in the last release. You could technically, I suppose, but...
Speaking of that, I have one thing to bring up here. I think 2024 was the year of LTS, long-term support.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. All right.
I mean, finally, all the cloud providers now have lined up behind LTS, right? It started with Microsoft last year. Then I don't remember when AWS announced it. It was early this year or late last year. And then Google joined in. So now the 3 major cloud providers at least are all, providing some form of long-term support.
That's a fair point from a cloud provider perspective. I feel like from the open source perspective, a lot of those conversations happened at the end of last year, beginning of this year. So I don't know that I would call 2024 the year of LTS from an open source perspective, but you got a good point on the cloud provider
On the
side.
Cloud providers, yeah. I mean, definitely the working group LTS still exists and they're still in discussions, right?
Yeah.
Their last communities discussion was very interesting.
Oh, yeah?
I think 2024 is, I would say, the year of implementation of LTS.
Sure.
So you start doing something.
There we go.
This stuff takes time. You are trying to move a lot of, and LTS is such a interesting concept because even without LTS, a lot of enterprise did not have the velocity to just hop versions that way anyway. So Kubernetes was always LT. Now it is with the S is the support. So
Definitely.
True. The community isn't going to do that much on that S itself.
Exactly. So for most people, Kubernetes always was LT because they could not just version hop in every 3 months.
I guess if I get $1 for every time I talk to customers and they say, yes, we're still running 1.26, I'll be probably rich by now.
They're that far already? 1.26?
Oh, yeah. I can assure you I had many conversations. Yes. I had many conversations with people who are still running 1.26. So
also, that is the reason that I say that the last long-term support community discussion was very interesting. It was basically that the open source community can't do much about the S because we don't have funding to fund support people for you to call or anything. So what does it look like for the community to do long-term support? And I think the cloud providers implementing it is a good way to frame it.
One other thing I was going to actually bring up from an earlier point that you mentioned about Kubernetes being open source and anyone can pull any changes they need to make. This is probably a call out to the listeners. If you know anyone successfully doing that for longer than 3 months, or let's say 6 months, I would like to hear about it.
That would be fascinating.
Yeah, because you could, fork and make that one change yourself, but Kubernetes release is going to go forward. The new version is going to come in. How do you then go back and reconcile back? Or do you just keep, for every new release, just keep forking and just re-adding the change that you just made? Because that sounds like a nightmare scenario to me for maintaining that.
I think the S is going to have some problems on that one.
Yeah. So if you or any of your friend does this, tell me. I would like to hear your stories. And yes.
Or your nightmares, really.
Or your nightmares.
Another example of, I don't know if we can call LTS a standard that was implemented by the community and then the implementations are created by other things. But in that vein is another trend in the community and in the technology, which is Gateway API. I was excited to see Gateway API continue to develop this year. So the idea behind Gateway API, if you haven't heard our episodes on that or checked out any of the sessions, which are always packed at KubeCon, is that the community created this custom resource definition. They did not implement it as a feature for release for a few different reasons, but it's a standard that is then implemented by the providers in how Kubernetes handles ingress.
Yeah, you can call it next-gen ingress, basically. You can call it next-gen ingress, right? So it started in 2019, but it have matured quite a lot over time. And as you said, every KubeCon, the talks about Gateway are always packed. On that same topic, I think what I'm excited about next is the LLM Gateway, which is based on the Gateway API. So that's the next thing that is coming out.
That was something that I found very confusing at KubeCon North America, honestly, because there was this one set of keynotes where everybody was talking about LLM gateways. And it seems like there's several different implementations going on, but there is one that's coming from the Kubernetes open source community based on Gateway API.
Yeah, there is a reference architecture, I guess, or a reference implementation that will be coming out. I guess we'll have to figure out a way to cover that in the podcast for sure, with maintainers.
Yeah, we should have an episode.
Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely something that I'm excited about. I don't want to let's not use time now for the details, but it will be very interesting to look at for next year for sure.
Well, I do kind of want to dive into the details a little bit since we have our AI correspondent here, Mofi.
Oh, Mofi.
Do you know much about LLM gateways and why are they so exciting? I don't quite get it, honestly.
I think the main part that is going to be exciting with the LLM gateway is that ideally you could treat your large language model serving as a regular web application, but the things you're looking for on a regular web application that your HPA metrics and other things usually depend on your resource like CPU and RAM. LLM gateway is going to give you a bit more signal of what kind of queue you have and what kind of requests you're coming in and how do you scale your accelerated workload in a different way. So it is very similar, but I think the reason they're a little bit special because they depend on accelerated hardware, which you need a little bit extra care. So the gateway is still the gateway API, but because it's large language models, because it's like GPUs and TPUs, We just want to have these additional metrics to be able to scale properly and do a lot of fun stuff. And security is a big one, managing queues, being able to route traffic to the right place within the least amount of time, the least amount of cost. That is important. So there is some additional care that is required.
I feel like hardware is the name of the game for why AI is so exciting in the world of infrastructure, is that it's just putting so much more focus on what kinds of hardware you have available to you and how you're using a variety of different types of hardware in your distributed systems.
Yeah, definitely.
One other thing I was going to bring up, I think 2024 also, it's not as commonly thought about, but it seems to me like a big win for security as well. Falco graduated this year, and this KubeCon Site Manager graduated.
Yes.
So like we have two big, like a security-focused CNCF project that graduated. So that is pretty big news.
And there was also a whole day of keynotes at KubeCon North America just dedicated to security. And I believe in Paris, they had that like security unconference thing that they did at one point. So it has definitely been a big theme this year as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for 2025, they are consolidating OSS security and cloud native security. So there will be one conference called Open Source Security Con.
Oh, interesting.
Which will be a flagship event, actually. So there will be 5 KubeCons, and then they don't call it cloud, they call it an Open Source Security Con. So yeah, that's interesting.
One of the interesting things that one of the folks I interviewed at KubeCon mentioned as one of their favorite things that they learned was in the security keynotes, Nikita gave one that talked about the risks of quantum computing into computer security in the future. And so that was something that I had not had on my radar or on my bingo card. And I don't know that that's around the corner, but it will be interesting if someday that is the big hot trend that we're talking about on here, is the introduction of quantum computing into our infrastructure realm.
I mean, the devices working group probably will be interested in figuring out how to add a quantum, compute into your Kubernetes nodes. That could be fun.
That would be very interesting. She was, of course, talking about like the potential for quantum computing to break encryption.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Which is a very different area than ever entering the infrastructure realm, but interesting to think about.
I want LLMs running on GPUs, running on quantum computing managed by Kubernetes.
Mm-hmm.
Such future.
That's what I want. Yes. Yeah. When I see that, I will happily die. It's fine. Do you want to add to the buzzword, Mofi? Anything?
I feel like the security risk for quantum, I don't know if there's a recording of this that I could go back and watch, but I think a few years ago I saw like this video of why like the quantum computing would be able to just break all encryption is because most of our encryption is based on like multiplying really big prime numbers together, and finding the factors of that number is very difficult. But in quantum computing, there's this algorithm called Shor's algorithm that can just find the prime factor of any two numbers very quickly. So that's why quantum computing would be the risk against like encryption, because it can just find the two prime factor. And once you find it, you could basically brute force your solution to any encryption that you could see. When a regular computer, figuring out the prime factors takes like billions of years, and a big enough quantum computer could do that in like minutes. So I think right now, the biggest quantum computers are still not as powerful enough to be able to handle the situation, but some people are working on it. But I think the silver lining there is once we have quantum computers strong enough to break encryption, we're probably going to move on to quantum encryption to begin with. So it's going to take like even more powerful computer to break those encryptions. So it's not really all doom and gloom that, the moment quantum computer becomes a thing, all passwords are obsolete. But there is also the movement of like passwordless. Like a lot of things are, instead of typing in a password, you are doing some sort of other sort of way to verify that you are you. So yeah, so don't be alarmed. Don't start putting everything under the ground in a bunker. It probably will be okay. It's not a guarantee, but it probably will be okay.
Actually, you know what? You reminded me of an interview we did last year with Emily Fox. And I remember very well in the interview, one of the things that was brought up was Emily telling me that in a conference, somebody told Emily, I cannot believe I'm going to say that, but I think that putting your password on a sticker note under your keyboard is probably more secure than having it online. So just like following the don't put everything under the bunker. Yes, but like just be prepared just in case, I'm just saying.
Yeah. Now you should have, everybody should have two-factor. Your two-factor should not be your phone number. So I'm turning this podcast into a security podcast at this point, but I'll take my speakerphone on the town square and tell people to be more secure. Yes. Your messages are not as secure, so use other ways to two-factor. Use Authenticator if you can.
Yes.
So.
And everything we're talking about here with quantum security and quantum computing is, I think, more farther future than,
right, yeah,
than anything else we've talked about, at least.
Don't use your birthdays as your password. Don't use your children or pet's name as your password. Those are public knowledge. People can figure this out by talking to you. So don't do those. So
definitely.
That is still valid.
Yeah.
Social engineering, still a vector for security attacks.
Yes. I want to just pull us a little bit back to the podcast itself. Just like inserting some plugs here. First of all, we're on Blue Sky. So please go follow us there.
That's been an interesting thing we could talk about.
Yes. I think it's been interesting that everybody's moving to Blue Sky. My number of followers are blowing up. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, if you haven't checked out Blue Sky yet, I have probably mentioned it before on the podcast, but I am one of the leads who helps to run all of the social media for the open source Kubernetes project. And we created Blue Sky accounts. There's one for contributors. There's one for the project at large that's more focused toward end users and the general public. And we also have another one for newsletter, the Last Week in Kubernetes Development newsletter. And just, we created it maybe like 10 or 11 days before KubeCon North America, and the numbers just went way up. And the engagement there is really high. So it's an interesting platform to keep an eye on.
Yes. And the other one is, I guess you have figured that out by now if you're listening, but we do not have the podcast on Google Podcasts anymore because it was deprecated. So we had to move to YouTube. So if you are using YouTube or YouTube Music, you can still listen to the podcast there. And we are going to be doing some more video content going forward, which I'm looking forward to.
I'm also very excited.
Yeah. Mofi and I have been bothering people at KubeCon North America, shooting some content. Well, mostly you've been bothering. I was just recording. So, yes. So we'll be publishing some video interviews in there.
I always find it so intimidating to walk up to attendees at KubeCon and be like, hello, would you like to be on the Kubernetes podcast from Google? And so thank you very much to everyone who was willing to be a part of it for KubeCon North America and for any of the events where we do these interviews and now videos. So if you do see us at events, I will always remind everyone, please do come up to us, find us. We would love to have you on.
Yes. And speaking of that, one of the feedback we heard quite a lot, and we are listening, is that people told us they want to hear more end users.
Yes.
In the show,
excited
right?
About this.
And we already actually have a couple of people lined up from few end user companies. So we're going to be doing some more end users. I will be very excited to talk to people who are actually using Kubernetes day to day. That will be exciting. So yeah, so we are listening to the feedback, and please keep this feedback coming. If you see us, or you can use our email address, kubernetespod@google.com. Or is it kubernetespod or kubernetespodcast? I always forget. I think it's kubernetespodcast@google.com.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, yes. It's in the show notes anyway. You'll find it there.
You'll hear it at the end if you stay to the end of the episode.
So yeah. All right, folks. We are at about 30 minutes, so I think I don't want to drag this for too long. Maybe we can go quickly a round table, and you tell me what have been your highlights of 2024. Let's do it this way. I am putting you on the spot. Mofi.
My highlight for 2024, well, among many things, but I'm going to talk about the most recent one. So Abdel and I got to give a talk at KubeCon North America. And as of yesterday, we got the feedback back from the CNCF after the talk.
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. Again, that's not that important. I'm okay with 10 out of 10. But the part that is that is the best for me is one of the comment basically said, both speakers, these guys were helpful and hilarious. And that's
so accurate.
That's highlight moment. I actually made a post on Blue Sky saying that needs to go on my epitaph. Right? Like that. Like Mofi, he was helpful and hilarious. That's it.
That's how I want to be remembered, right?
That's how I want to be remembered. Yeah. Helpful and hilarious. That's just a double H. That's me.
Yeah. I would add to this just very quickly. Mofi have been you hosted 2 episodes this year, right? or more?
2 episodes, and a couple of the episodes I came in as like reading out the news. The 2 episodes I did was on Ray, and one of the episode on the Ray one, we actually talked to Spotify, who is end user company too. So, right, Spotify is an end user.
Yes, yeah, they are an end user company. Yes, correct.
Yeah, so we talked to them about not directly about Kubernetes, but their ML platform that uses Ray on Kubernetes. So that was interesting stuff to see how companies are leveraging Kubernetes. And part that was really interesting for me is that a lot of folks talk about how complex Kubernetes is and like how expensive it is to run and all that. But when you reach a certain level of complexity, then Kubernetes starts becoming easier than any alternative you could have, or cheaper than anything managed, both for engineering hours spent or the time actually you have to spend on building the stuff. So that was an interesting conversation there for me.
And just to call out that Mofi and Abdel's talk at KubeCon North America was about Ray. So if you enjoyed the Ray episode or you haven't heard it yet, maybe check out their talk as well, which will give you an introduction to Ray and how to use Ray to build AI platforms on top of Kubernetes.
Definitely. What about you, Kaslin? 2024?
I was going to go with the boring answer of the 10-year anniversary, but I actually thought of something that I am more excited about. It's not a moment by itself, but I am really excited that I got the chance to mentor folks in the open source Kubernetes community this year. That's something that I always care about and have done for years and years, but I really went hard on it this year trying to help some folks level up and take on new responsibilities and leadership in the open source community. And I've trained up a couple of new leads for communications about contributor events. So we used to do the Kubernetes contributor summits, and we are switching to maintainer summits. That's also an exciting thing that's happening, and I hope to send more comms out about soon. I have some guidelines for contributors on what's happening with that. Feel free to reach out to me on Slack anytime about that. But I trained up a couple of new leads there, and I had 5 shadows for my comms leadership position with the event this time, and they all did really, really well. So I think folks got something out of that experience. And in the comms team and in SIG Contribx, we've had a couple of new leads come up. We've got a new person helping with our mentoring sub-project. We have one person who we need to get the PR in to make them a SIG Contribx co-chair.
Nice.
We also have a number of folks in the comms sub-project who have been shadowing for lead roles within that sub-project. So there's been a lot of mentoring and shadowing going on, and I'm really excited at the progress folks have made.
Awesome. Great.
So what has been your highlight, Abdel?
Oh, where do I get started? Well, I think obviously the talk we did at KubeCon have been one of them. That's because it was my first talk at KubeCon. And my first time being in KubeCon in North America. I've only been in the European version before. I was very, very happy and humbled that we managed to get some very prominent members of the Cloud Native community to be on the show. Matt Klein from Envoy, the creator of Envoy, Solomon Hykes, the creator of Dagger, ex-Docker, a bunch of the episodes that Kaslin did with Kelsey, with Tim Hawkin, Dims. The list of names is too long to mention in one episode, but I think it was very humbling to be able in a position where we can reach out to these people and they say, yes, we're happy to come on the show, right? I think that's a privilege we have with the podcast for sure. Beside that, just being able to do keynote a couple of KCDs, being to 5 KCDs this year in Europe, that was exciting. Attending quite a lot of conferences, talking to the community, talking to people in Cloud Native space. I think all in all, it was a pretty good year, and I'm excited about 2025.
I think that's a good answer.
Thank you.
I am judging your answers.
Yes, I know. I skipped it. All right, I think we should probably just wrap it up here. Thank you for being on the show, folks.
And thank you all out there for listening in 2024.
And I guess if you are listening to this, happy New Year's and happy holidays. And we'll see you in 2025.
We'll see you then.
Bye.
That brings us to the end of another episode. If you enjoyed the show, please help us spread the word and tell a friend. If you have any feedback for us, you can find us on social media at KubernetesPod or reach us by email at kubernetespodcast@google.com. You can also check out the website at kubernetespodcast.com where you'll find transcripts, show notes, and links to subscribe. Please consider rating us in your podcast player so we can help more people find and enjoy the show. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.